Can you imagine a dog being kicked out of the house and by its owner? Well, that's exactly what happened. Expelled, hurt, and without understanding why, he disappeared without a trace. But what no one could have ever imagined is that days later, that same dog would unexpectedly reappear, right at the moment when its former owner needed it most. What he did that day left everyone in shock, an attitude so unbelievable, so powerful, that even those who saw it with their own eyes had difficulty believing it. This is one of those stories that prove that a dog's love goes beyond any heartache, and that sometimes true miracles come from those we least expect. Have you ever felt that sometimes animals understand things that even humans cannot understand? That they see beyond what is in front of their eyes? Maybe this explains why, even after everything he's been through, Rocky never stopped loving that man who one day sent him away as if he were worthless. But before we get to that surprising moment, we need to know who Rocky was and why he could never be forgotten. Rocky was one of those dogs that seems to have come out of a fairy tale, not because of his appearance, but because of the purity in his eyes. A medium-sized caramel with floppy ears and eyes that always sparkled as if they were smiling at the world. There was no malice, there was no grudge, just the desire to be close, to be a part, to belong. Since he was a puppy, Rocky demonstrated above-average intelligence. He learned quickly, observed everything, and seemed to understand the emotional state of whoever was around. When someone cried, he gently touched their nose as if to say, "I'm here." When he saw a smile, he would jump up and wag his tail with such intensity that he seemed to want to celebrate together. It was impossible to ignore his presence. Rocky wasn't just a dog, he was company. It was a living, constant, and silently powerful presence. Mr. Eduardo, his owner, received him when Rocky was still a little ball of fur, small enough to fit in one arm. At that time, Eduardo still had joy in his eyes, a sparkle of someone who still believed in the good things in life. Rocky became his walking partner, his silent confidant, and over time the only person capable of eliciting a genuine smile from that reserved man. For Rocky, Eduardo was everything. His world revolved around him. All it took was the sound of the key turning in the door, and Rocky's tail started beating the floor like a party drum. He didn't need expensive toys, fancy treats, or large spaces to run around. He only needed one thing, to be close to the one he loved. And he loved that man as only a dog can love, without conditions, without demands, without expecting anything in return other than a look, a touch, a word. On good days, Eduardo and Rocky formed an inseparable duo. They sunbathed on the balcony in the morning, shared the same silence in the lazy afternoons, and at night, Rocky always sat at the foot of the bed like a faithful guardian. It didn't matter what the weather was outside, whether it was cold, hot, or stormy. Rocky was always there, always willing, always present. But over time, something inside Mr. Eduardo began to change. Joy gave way to tiredness. The energy turned into apathy. The man who used to talk to Rocky as if he were people started to remain silent, to move away, to close himself off in a world where not even that affectionate dog could enter. Rocky noticed. He always notices. Dogs sense when something is wrong. They know when pain takes up too much space inside a heart. And that's what happened to Eduardo. The mourning for his wife, the loneliness of his age, the absence of children around, all of this created a weight that he didn't know how to carry. And unfortunately, the one who paid for it was Rocky. But it is not yet the time to talk about the injustice that would come. Not yet. Before that, it's important to understand how hard Rocky tried. He tried to get closer, he tried to cheer up his owner, he had the old ball in his mouth, he lay next to him like he used to. But it wasn't the same anymore. Eduardo no longer stroked his head like he did before. He no longer spoke his name with that somewhat surly voice but full of tenderness. It was as if, little by little, Rocky was ceasing to exist for that man. And yet, he was still there. This is where the connection with the audience intensifies, because all of us who love animals have seen this type of behavior. We've already felt that look that seems to beg for a crumb of attention, that tail wagging shyly in the hope of affection. Rocky was no different. He remained firm, believing that somehow love would win, that the owner would smile again, that silence would give way to the affection of before. Those who have a dog know, they feel everything, and they suffer in silence. Rocky was suffering, not for lack of food or comfort, but for lack of what matters most, bonding. That invisible thread that united the two had become tenuous, almost broken, but still he remained. And that says it all about the kind of dog Rocky was: loyal, playful, faithful to the extreme. He was the kind of dog you would love until the end, even without being loved back. And it's exactly this kind of love that begins to prepare us for what's to come. Because, as you will see, it was precisely this unconditional loyalty that transformed a story of abandonment into one of the greatest lessons in forgiveness and redemption you've ever heard. Now imagine this: a dog that was kicked out, rejected, forgotten, being the only one capable of saving the life of the man who ignored him. It doesn't seem real, does it? But it is. And what happens next will prove that true love, especially a dog's love, is capable of crossing even the greatest pains and healing wounds that not even time has been able to close. Prepare yourself for what comes next. Rocky will still surprise you, and maybe by the end of this story, you'll never look at a dog the same way again. Are you feeling that lump in your throat too? This is not weakness, it is sensitivity. It's because stories like Rocky's touch where few things can, deep in the chest. Here, on this channel, you will never be just another viewer. Here is a place for those who truly feel, for those who understand the value of a puppy's gaze, for those who know that animal love is pure, faithful, and eternal, even when the world turns its back. So come and be part of this community that breathes real, deep, and unforgettable stories. Stories that show that even in abandonment, a miracle can be born. Like this video, leave a like full of emotion, and press the like button, sign up. Because there are still a lot of chilling stories for us to live together. Can you remember the sound of the radio playing in the background as the smell of fresh coffee filled the air? That kind of morning that seems too simple to be. Unforgettable, but that remains remembered like an old photograph. It was exactly like that in Mr. Eduardo, a modest little house, with walls peeling white from so many past summers, windows always open to the wind, and a dirt yard that seemed too big for those who saw it from the outside, but too small for the hearts of those who lived inside. In the middle of this simple scenario, there was Rocky, running free, happy, without knowing that his joy was one of the last threads that still held the spirit of a man already tired of life. He was the first to wake up, always. Before the sun even appeared behind the trees in the forest that surrounded the land, Rocky was already on his feet, alert for the slightest sign of movement. When I heard the coffee maker bubbling in the kitchen, I would run in circles in the yard as if to say, "Wake up, there's a new day waiting for us." It was a house where luxury had no place, but peace reigned. There were different noises there, the sound of branches creaking in the wind, of birds fighting for space on the highest branch, of dry leaves being dragged by Rocky's curious nose. And there was also that specific sound that only dogs can make, a long sigh, full of lightness, when they find the right place on the warm floor to lie down in the sun. Rocky did this every day, and when he did, he seemed at peace with the world, because he was. He had everything he needed most, a home, and someone he loved with all his soul. Mr. Eduardo, although silent and reserved, was the type of man who spoke with gestures, and Rocky understood everyone. When he left the house with his worn hat on his head, Rocky already knew it was time for a walk. When he took the stool and sat on the porch, Rocky lay down next to it, resting his chin on his paws in total harmony. They didn't need many words, and maybe that's why that relationship was so strong, because everything that really mattered happened in silence. In the late afternoon, after the heat eased, the two walked together along a dirt trail through the woods. Rocky always ahead, but never too far. He looked back the whole time, making sure Mr. Eduardo was still there, following in his footsteps. It was as if he said, without needing to bark, "Don't worry, I'm with you." And it was. At every step, in every quick glance, on each tail wagging lightly. Sometimes they stopped under a large tree that shaded a rock. Eduardo sat there, took off his hat, ran his hand over his face, and just stayed. Rocky, in turn, took the opportunity to stretch out on the damp floor, breathing slowly, as if that moment was enough to fill all the voids in the world. There was no rush. There was no charge. Just presence. And that, for a dog, is everything. In those days, time seemed to run slower. Rocky got used to the routine of the house, to the sounds of the wood stove, to the smell of the stone soap that Mr. Eduardo used it to wash his clothes, with the way the morning light came through the window and illuminated the kitchen floor where he loved to lie. Small details that became part of him, like tattoos in memory. He was a dog who knew every corner of the house. He knew where the owner's old slippers were, the bowl of food hidden in the low cupboard, the torn cloth that served as a bed in the corner of the room. But more than that, Rocky knew every gesture of the man he loved. I knew when he was sad. I knew when he needed silence. And he knew, especially, when all he needed was company. Rocky was that kind of dog, one who listens with his eyes, who understands with the heart, and who loves with a strength that not everyone knows how to recognize, at least not right away. Now, think with me. How could a dog like that, who knew so much about love, about shared time, and about silent loyalty, be able to deal with what was coming? How would he react when suddenly that bond was broken, when everything he knew as home became absence? Because life, as you know, doesn't always warn you when it's going to change course. And it was there in this scenario of peace built with affection and routine that something inside Mr. Eduardo began to fade away. But before the story takes a darker turn, it's important to remember all of this. From the yard full of paw prints in the dirt, from the old cloth where Rocky lay with his nose out of the door, the sound of the kettle whistling in the kitchen, because it's these details that make the story so real, so human, so close to us. Anyone who has a dog knows. You know how they are part of the house even when they are outside. You know that all it takes is a different bark, a prolonged absence, an unusual silence, and everything seems out of place. You know that there is no love like that of a dog, because it is the only love that requires nothing to continue existing. And Rocky proved this every day with small gestures, with your constant presence, with his tail wagging even when everything indicated that there was no reason to party. He believed in love even when love began to fade in the hearts of those he loved most. That was Rocky's world, made of dirt, open skies, and a heart full of hope. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know that the same land where he rolled with joy would later be the cold ground of his loneliness. But even without knowing it, he was still there. Because love, for him, was still greater than any shadow. And this is where everything starts to change. Because, as you will see, when the bond between a man and a dog breaks, it is not just one animal that suffers. It's an entire universe that loses its color. And sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what really matters. Have you ever felt the world change color from one moment to the next? As if everything that was once warm and welcoming suddenly became cold, silent, and distant? Sometimes it doesn't take a storm to turn everything upside down. Sometimes all it takes is an absence. And the silence it leaves behind can be deafening. That's exactly what happened in the house where Rocky lived. A home that previously overflowed with a simple routine full of affection turned into a dark space where even the sun seemed to shine less willingly. Mr.'s wife Eduardo is gone, and with her she took his smile, the joy of the days, the lightness of the moments. The coffee no longer tastes good. The balcony has lost its charm. And Rocky felt everything. Because dogs don't need words to understand what's happening. They feel it in the smell, in the look, in the way the owner walks around the house. They feel the weight of the steps, the time between one breath and the next. And Rocky felt it. He felt when Eduardo began to remain silent. You felt when his eyes lost their shine. He felt when the gestures became hard and the hands no longer sought his fur as before. Rocky tried. He tried every way. On the first day of morning, he lay next to the bed, waiting for his owner to get up as he always did. In the second, he ran after the little ball of cloth, wanting to bring a little life back to the house. On the third, he stood at the door, waiting for the sunset ride that never came. And in the following days, Rocky just watched, waiting, silently hoping for a sign that her human was still there, inside that body tired of sadness. But Mr. Edward was losing himself, plunged into a grief that swallowed everything around him. Suddenly, he started avoiding Rocky. I walked past him as if I didn't see him. He no longer responded to the soft barks, nor to the insistent look of that dog who just wanted to know if everything was okay. The days dragged on, increasingly gray. The house, once alive with footsteps and games, became a space of silence and closed walls. And yet Rocky remained. Because this is the kind of love that doesn't give up, even when there is no more reciprocation. Until it happened, a day that seemed as common as any other, but that would bring a definitive rupture. It was late afternoon, the sky was already starting to turn golden, and Rocky, as he always did, stood at the door of the house, waiting for the signal to start the walk. He didn't know that. That afternoon, Mr. Eduardo had received painful news about matters relating to the inheritance left by his wife, something related to a family dispute, an unresolved conflict. That, added to the suffering he was already carrying, became a trigger. And Rocky, without understanding anything, did what he always did. He approached. He tried to console. He put his nose against his owner's leg, wagging his tail, offering love, the only resource he had. But Eduardo, in a fit of anger and frustration, exploded. In a scream that seemed to come from a place much deeper than just that moment, he lost control. He stood up abruptly, pushed Rocky hard, and in the heat of the pain that consumed him, shouted for him to get out. And then, in a gesture that still echoes, like a nightmare today, he kicked him. Rocky, scared, fell to the dirt floor, not understanding what was happening. His eyes, so full of life, now reflected confusion and sadness. He didn't cry. Dogs don't cry like we do. But his eyes, Rocky's eyes said it all. And maybe that was what hurt the most. Because in that instant, something inside him broke. The tail stopped wagging, the ears lowered, and slowly, without barking, without making any noise, Rocky got up and walked to the gate. He didn't run. He didn't bark back. He didn't insist. It just was. It was with a wounded soul but a still loving heart. Rocky never came back. Inside the house, Mr. Eduardo fell to the living room floor, overcome by a dry cry, the kind that scratches inside. He knew what he had done. He knew he had taken out his pain on the only creature who would never abandon him. And maybe that's why I didn't go after it. Because the guilt is heavy, and sometimes it hurts so much that it paralyzes. But outside on the dusty street that led to the village entrance, Rocky was walking, aimlessly, without understanding, with a dirty body and a broken heart. He was still looking back, as if waiting to hear a call. But the call didn't come. And when night fell, Rocky found shelter under a tree, lay down on the cold ground and tried to sleep with the emptiness that now took the place of certainty. From that day on, everything changed. Mister's house, Edward, became even more silent. Because the silence of a home without a dog is not just any silence. It is a type of emptiness that echoes on the walls, in the corners of the room, in the sound that you no longer hear when you open the door. It's a silence that hurts. Edward noticed this, but he didn't have the courage to go out and look. And Rocky followed the paths of the city, appearing from time to time near the house, but always keeping his distance, like someone waiting, like someone who forgives, but has not yet forgotten. Perhaps the most moving part of this story is realizing that even after the pain of rejection, Rocky kept coming back. He didn't enter, he didn't bark, but he watched from afar. He slept near the fence, hidden among the bushes. He watched as he always did, because his love was greater than abandonment. It was stronger than the pain. It was too pure to turn into hurt. And that, in itself, says everything about the type of soul that exists inside a puppy. Even when they are cast out, even when they are hurt, they continue to love. They continue to care. They continue to believe that one day the gate will open again. Rocky's didn't open. Not at that moment, but his story is far from over. And that's when the real miracle begins to unfold. Because destiny sometimes chooses the most injured to fulfill the noblest roles. And Rocky still had a lot to teach about forgiveness, about loyalty, and about what it really means to be a family. But that, you'll find out soon enough. Have you ever had that feeling that something incredibly unfair has just happened, but the world continues as if nothing has changed, as if the pain that is screaming inside you has no voice? Because that's exactly how Rocky felt at that moment. Cast out of the only place he knew as home, banished from the hearts of those he loved most, having done absolutely nothing to deserve it. The only thing he knew, the routine, the smells, the steps, the sound of his owner's voice, was now just an absence. A silence that hurt, not because it was empty, but because it was full of memories. Rocky wandered. There was nowhere to go. The street, with its unfamiliar sounds, mixed smells of smoke, trash, and wet earth, was a world he didn't understand. He didn't know how to cross streets carefully, nor where to hide from the rain. I didn't know who was a friend and who was a threat, but what he knew, and he never stopped knowing, was that he needed to go back, or at least try. For days, maybe weeks, Rocky walked the same paths he used to walk with Mr. Edward. I passed along the dirt trail, through the shade of the tree where they used to rest, along the benches in the little square where from time to time the owner stopped to talk to neighbors. He sniffed the wind, hoping to catch that familiar scent, and stared at each person who passed by, as if looking for a familiar face. He was a confused dog, but it wasn't just confusion in him. It was pain. It was wounded hope. It was the kind of feeling we usually see in the eyes of someone we love but was betrayed. And the saddest of all, he couldn't understand why. He could not find within himself a reason why he had been rejected. Rocky didn't know that Mr. Edward was suffering too, that he wondered every day where the cub could be, that he felt the weight of guilt every time he looked at the rug where Rocky used to sleep, that sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night with the impression that he had heard a bark, only to remember that that sound no longer lived there. He didn't know because he never saw it, because Eduardo, overcome by pride and pain, didn't follow. And that's the cruelest thing about this story. Love existed on both sides, but it was silence that won. Maybe you know someone who has felt this, or maybe you've already felt it on your skin. That knot in the chest of knowing that something precious has been lost, and that no matter how much there is longing, there is also an invisible barrier, pride, fear, shame, that prevents the reunion. Rocky didn't know how to name these feelings. He just knew something was wrong, deeply wrong. And yet, he waited. Because dogs are like that. They have a patience that we don't understand, a persistence that surpasses time. Rocky chose not to walk away completely. He started sleeping near the house, outside, hidden among the bushes. I didn't want to invade. I didn't want to force anything. But I wanted to be close. Because deep down, he believed that that gate could open again, that that scream that sent him away would one day be replaced by a call, that the hand that pushed him would return to caress his head. The injustice Rocky felt was not rational, it was emotional. It was that kind of pain that sets in slowly and eats away at the soul. Every time he heard footsteps inside the house, his ears perked up. Every time the door creaked, his eyes lit up, only to go out seconds later. This was a silent punishment, and he didn't understand why. And on the other side, Mr. Eduardo felt something similar. The difference is that he knew why. He knew what he had done. He knew the exact moment he lost it, and it hurt in a different way. It hurt like regret, but not the repentance that leads to action. It was that paralyzing kind, that hurts so much that you convince yourself it's too late. Eduardo thought Rocky had already forgotten him, that perhaps he had been adopted by another family, or worse, that he was injured, lost, aimless, and that doubt was like a knife slowly turning in the chest. He thought about leaving, looking for him, asking the neighbors, but he always stopped halfway. Pride, fear, maybe a little of each. Perhaps the shame of admitting that he had made the biggest mistake of his life, or the belief that he didn't deserve forgiveness. Because deep down he knew Rocky would forgive him. That's what hurt the most, knowing that that dog, even though he was hurt, still loved him. And Rocky proved that every day, lying near the fence in silence, waiting. He was not looking for another home. He didn't move away. He was like a guardian, waiting for his position to be restored, not out of stubbornness, but out of love. Because for him, Mr. Eduardo was still his human, and no push, no harsh words, no absence was enough to erase that. Dogs don't forget who they love. They can be hurt, abandoned, rejected, but within them, the memory of the affection experienced is stronger than any heartache. And maybe that's why stories like Rocky's hurt us so much, because they reveal the nobility of a love that we as human beings often don't know how to return with the same intensity. Time passed, the seasons have changed, the house has aged a little more, and Rocky was still there, thin, dirty, but with the same hopeful eyes. He still looked out the kitchen window every morning. He still wagged his tail when he saw someone approaching. I still believed. And that's what moves the most, because his love wasn't just about longing. It was about loyalty. It was about waiting, even without guarantees, even without signs, even in the most unfair pain. And you who are reading this far know exactly what that means. Because if there's one thing that a dog's love teaches us, it's that you don't need to understand to love, and that even in the face of the greatest injustice, it is still possible to forgive. But this story is still far from over, and what comes next will prove that love, even when it's hurt, never stops being love. Rocky still had a role in this world, and when Mr. Eduardo is hanging by a thread, it will be precisely the one he once expelled, who will have the chance to save everything. And that's when everything changes. Have you ever noticed how some puppies seem to have a memory that goes beyond time? How do they manage to keep paths, voices, and smells throughout their lives, even after being ignored, rejected, or even expelled? Rocky was like that. A puppy who, despite everything he had suffered, was still guided by the purest feeling he carried within him: love. And it wasn't just any love. It was a love that persisted, even without hope, that he remained alive, even without answers, and that he kept waiting, even when everything around him seemed to have given up. After that afternoon when he was kicked out of the house by Mr. Edward, Rocky never crossed that gate again. Not because I didn't want to, but because he respected it, and because, perhaps deep down, he still believed that the call would come. And when he came, he wanted to be around. I wanted to be ready. I wish I could go back, not as an invader, but as someone who has always belonged there. So, even living on the streets, even without a real home, Rocky stayed there, like a discreet shadow, like a guardian who doesn't abandon his post, even after being dismissed. He started to hang around the old house like someone watching over a sacred temple, always at a distance, always careful. During the day, he hid under the trees, watching. At night, he sought shelter in the corners of the sidewalk, under a neighbor's porch, or under an old car parked across the street. But it never really went away. His heart still lived there, and where the heart lives, the body also insists on remaining. Rocky knew Mr. Edward. I knew the time he opened the kitchen window, the sound of the radio being turned on, the exact moment the front door opened. He stood up in silence, ears pricked, eyes attentive, tail that trembled with the desire to wag, but held back by doubt. Would today be the day? Will he see me today? Will you call me? But the call didn't come, and Rocky still continued. Some villagers began to notice the presence of that caramel dog always nearby. Some gave leftover food, a kind word, some water on the hottest days. But Rocky didn't tie himself to anyone. He thanked him with his look, accepted the gesture, but never stayed. I never followed anyone. Because he was still on a mission, and his mission was to wait. It was beautiful, and at the same time devastating, to see how that dog remained faithful to a home that no longer wanted him, to an owner who didn't even look outside anymore, to a past that seemed to have been forgotten by everyone but him. And the most impressive thing is that Rocky expected nothing more than a sign, a simple gesture, a word. He didn't need explanations, excuses, spoken regrets. He just wanted to be called. I wanted to hear the sound of your voice again. I wanted to feel the touch of those hands that one day were shelter, and now were just a memory. Dogs are like that. They don't hold grudges like we do. They keep memories, and they cling to them with a strength that we don't understand. Rocky clung to the memory of the good days, in the shade of the tree where I used to rest with Mr. Edward, to the smell of food cooked on the wood stove, to the sound of slippers dragging around the house. All of this was still alive inside him, and that's what kept him around. There were days when the rain fell heavily, and Rocky had nowhere to take shelter. He remained huddled under a neighbor's porch, his eyes fixed on the house across the street. There were cold nights when he shivered but didn't move away. There were mornings when the smell of coffee filled the air again, and he approached, hopefully, only to see the curtain being closed. And still, he didn't give up. Rocky's persistence wasn't stubbornness. It was love, it was loyalty. It was something that only those who have had a very special puppy can understand. Because when a dog chooses to love someone, that love has no expiration date. It does not depend on the circumstances. It simply exists, and it continues to exist even when everything seems to say that it is no longer worth it. Rocky had that faith, the faith of those who love without demanding, the faith of those who wait even without promises. And this faith became stronger and stronger as the days went by. The more time passed, the stronger his connection with that place seemed, with that house, with that man. Inside, Mr. Eduardo remained trapped by his own pride, but something inside him also changed. Rocky's absence, which he tried to ignore at first, started to hurt more than he expected. He began to notice the excessive silence, the emptiness in the carpet, the lack of that noise in the backyard, and in lonely moments, he wondered where Rocky was. If it would be okay, if it would have been taken by someone. And although he never said it out loud, he felt it. I missed it. I missed it. And I felt ashamed for having let it all get there. But he didn't know Rocky was still around. I didn't know that every morning there were two watchful eyes across the street, watching your every move. That in the silent dawns, a faithful heart still beat strong just a few meters away, just wanting a chance. A new chance to go back to being what they were, to resume what should never have been interrupted. And this chance, as you will see, was closer than both of them imagined, because life, despite all the pain and distances, has a curious way of crossing paths that seemed lost. And Rocky, with all his silent persistence, with all his resistance in the name of love, was about to experience something that would change everything. What he didn't know, and couldn't even imagine, is that very soon, that loyalty he demonstrated day after day would become the key to something much bigger, something that would place him at the center of a story that no one would ever forget, and that would prove, once and for all, that a dog's love can not only wait, but also save. But that part is still coming. Do you believe that destiny can wait silently, right next to us, until the exact moment to act, as if he were just observing, patient, waiting for the right time to show that nothing, absolutely nothing, is by chance? Rocky never knew what destiny was. You never needed to understand these complicated things that we humans spend our lives trying to decipher. But that morning, that would change everything. I knew. Something was wrong, and this time, he couldn't just wait. The days continued with the same sad routine as before. Rocky was still hanging around the house. I still slept in the same corners of the sidewalk. I still woke up early and watched the gate. Mr. Eduardo, in turn, continued in his silence, the one that has no noise, but makes regret echo on every wall of the house. They were close but far away, and perhaps they would have been doomed to remain that way, if life hadn't screamed loud enough to breach that abyss. It was just any other morning. Heaven did not warn that nothing different would happen. The sun was rising as always. Rocky had already woken up, stretched, walked around the house. He had sniffed the gate, watched the porch, as he did every day. But then, out of nowhere, the sound. A dry, strong boom that broke the morning silence like an explosion. A noise that was not part of that scenario. Something coming from the road, something that didn't feel right. Rocky stiffened. His body, previously relaxed, became alert. The ears perked up, the eyes narrowed. The snout turned toward the direction of the sound. And then came that instinct. The same one that guided his steps there for so long. The same one that made him wait, even without promises. He knew. I knew. Something had happened, and he knew above all that someone needed him. Without hesitation, Rocky ran. He crossed the street, passed through the bushes, followed the dirt path he knew by heart. Every step was an impulse of the heart. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he was sure it was his duty to find out. It was on the curve of the dirt road, just a few meters from the city, that Rocky saw the scene that would change his life forever. Mr. car, Eduardo, was turned sideways, between the trees with part of his hood crushed against a trunk, the broken glass, the smoking hood, the smell of metal and burning oil in the air, and inside, between the twisted seat and the steering wheel, he was bruised, pale, almost without strength. Rocky didn't hesitate. He approached carefully, sniffing the air, barking softly. Eduardo, hurt and confused, tried to move his arm, but he could barely. He was trapped, with a cut on his face, and was breathing heavily. And it was there, in the middle of that scene of pain and despair, that his eyes met Rocky's eyes. For a second, time stopped. Eduardo blinked as if doubting what he saw. Rocky approached a little closer, slowly. The barking became louder. He wasn't just getting attention. I was asking for help, begging, alerting the world that someone needed saving. But there was no one around. No cars passed at that time. No neighbors on the road. It was a forgotten road, at a time when the city was still waking up, if something wasn't done. Soon Eduardo wouldn't resist, and that's when Rocky's instinct turned into something even bigger. He ran He returned along the road at the same speed as he came. It would stop, bark loudly, and move forward again. I came across a few residents who were going to work and did something I had never done before. I insisted. He jumped on their legs, barked desperately, and pulled people by their clothes, almost like a human trying to form words, until a man, realizing that something was wrong, decided to follow him. Rocky took him to the accident site, and it was there, minutes later, that the ambulance was called, that help has arrived, that the rescue happened, and all because of a dog who never gave up hoping. At the hospital, the doctors were clear. A few more minutes and he wouldn't have made it. Eduardo was taken in serious condition, but with a real chance of recovering. And the news started to spread. Through the city streets, through the hospital corridors, through the emotional conversations of neighbors. It was the dog. That one, Rocky, he saved Mr. Eduardo. People were moved. Some cried, others smiled in disbelief. But they all agreed on one thing. It was unbelievable. Or rather, it was miraculous, because who would have reason to act that way if not someone who loves unconditionally? Rocky waited outside the hospital for hours. He lay down near the front door. He watched every movement with attentive eyes. The employees began to recognize him. They brought water and food, and he accepted, but he didn't budge, because there was still something he needed to see his human again, make sure he was alive, and maybe finally be called back. Inside, among tubes, bandages, and machines, Mr. Eduardo woke up. And the first image that came to his mind was not that of the accident, it wasn't the car. It was Rocky. That look, that bark, that presence that, even after everything that had happened, was there, to save him. And it was at that moment that something inside Eduardo broke, or maybe it fixed itself finally. Pride gave way to regret, and regret to the love that never ceased to exist. He cried, and it wasn't a cry of physical pain, it was a soulful cry, from someone who understood, too late, the value of those who were always around, from someone who recognized that in the end, he was saved not by luck, but by loyalty. Rocky wasn't just a dog, it never was. He was love in four-legged form. It was courage. It was loyalty. It was destiny disguised as an animal, patiently waiting for the moment to fulfill its mission. And that day, he delivered. And their lives would never be the same. But there was still a part missing. The most beautiful. The one that would make every tear shed worth it. Because the reunion was coming. And he would be more than exciting. It would be eternal. Have you ever felt how some stories seem to take on a life of their own? How do certain events, when they are born out of pain and turn into something bigger, start to spread without anyone having to push? It's as if the entire world stopped for a moment to listen, not with their ears, but with their hearts. And that's what happened after the accident, after the cry for help that no one heard, except Rocky. After that moment when a dog wounded inside saved the man who had really hurt him, there began a new part of the story, a part that was no longer made only of pain, but also of justice, of recognition, of redemption. Still in the hospital, among hurried nurses and attentive doctors, the comment spread from corridor to corridor. It was the dog, the caramel. He called for help. Some doubted, others cried with teary eyes, and there were those who said in a low voice with a hint of anger mixed with surprise, "That man didn't deserve it. He kicked him out of the house, didn't he? And now he's here, saved by him." Outside, while Eduardo struggled to recover, Rocky waited. He was leaning against the corner of the hospital entrance, as if he knew exactly what was happening. The eyes are attentive, the body is silent, but the heart is alert. He didn't want food. I didn't want a lap. He wanted to be there, because here was the man he never stopped loving. Even when he was rejected, even when he was kicked out like he was worthless, Rocky just wanted to see him again, knowing he was alive, feeling once again that there was still a bond between them. And it was then that a fundamental piece appeared. The truck driver, that simple man who happened to pass by the road and saw Rocky running and barking non-stop. The same person who had the sensitivity to stop, get out of the truck, follow the dog, and find Eduardo almost lifeless. He had recorded everything. First, because I found the attitude of that desperate dog curious. Then, by instinct. And finally, because what happened was too big to fit into memory alone. The video showed Rocky in action, attracting attention, pulling the hem of the truck, driver's pants running ahead like a guide, looking back all the time to make sure he was being followed. It was impossible to watch without getting emotional. And when the recording ended with the image of the crashed car and Eduardo being removed, the truck driver's sentence cut through the air like a well-aimed arrow. That dog saved his life. If it weren't for him, I would have gone straight. The recording was sent to a friend, who sent it to another, and within hours, the story spread. Social networks, neighborhood groups, local news pages. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who the caramel dog was, who had saved his former owner. And when they discovered that he was the same one who had been expelled, the commotion was even greater. The news took a form that no one expected. The abandoned dog who saved his ungrateful owner. It was a strong title, perhaps too harsh, but it reflected the essence of what had happened. People from all over started commenting, sharing, sending messages, some angry, others empathetic. But everyone was certain of one thing: that dog was special. Inside the hospital, Mr. Eduardo also saw the video. With the help of a nurse, he watched the recording on his cell phone. And there, at that moment, he couldn't hold back the tears. He saw Rocky running, leading the truck driver, barking desperately. He saw that look he knew so well, that look that, for so many months, he pretended not to see. And there, in that hospital bed, something finally broke. An entire wall of pride and regret came crashing down, and in its place something new was born, something purer, a desperate desire to fix what was broken. Meanwhile, outside, Rocky was still waiting. I didn't know the news. I didn't understand the buzz around it. All he knew was that he belonged there, lying on the cold floor with his eyes fixed on the hospital entrance. And the truth is, even if no one came, he would still be there. Because Rocky didn't do what he did for recognition. I did it out of love. But this time he would be seen. A group of volunteers from a local NGO went to the hospital to meet the dog in the story. They brought a collar, food, blanket. They took videos, took photos. A reporter appeared, then another, and another one. Rocky made headlines. The dog that never gave up. The silent hero, except for the dog he abandoned. The headlines were different, but the sentiment was the same. And people began to look at Rocky with eyes full of admiration. Justice little by little began to happen. Not that court or sentence justice, but the righteousness of the heart. Recognition of the value that many, including Eduardo, had refused to see. Rocky began to be called hero by the children who passed by. He received affection from strangers, received clothes, blankets, even offers of adoption. But he didn't want any of that. At the first opportunity, he escaped the collar they tried to put on him. He ran back to the hospital gate. He went back to lying down where he had always been. Because the justice he wanted wasn't applause. It was the reunion. It was hearing the sound of the voice of someone he never forgot. It was about going home, but this time, through the front door. Inside, Eduardo asked the doctor, "I want to see him. I need to see him." He was weaker than ever, but there was light in his eyes. A different urgency, a strength that was born from longing, gratitude, and love that he finally allowed to blossom again. And when the two met again, everything would change. The error would be exposed, yes, but he would also be forgiven, because a dog's love doesn't charge. He just waits. And Rocky had waited too long. What came next was not just the end of an exciting story. It was the beginning of a new life for both of them. A life where there was no longer room for pride or silence, just for love, the kind that survives abandonment, that resists pain, and that, at the right time, is capable of saving, in body and soul. But the reunion, that deserved a separate chapter, and he was coming, about to happen. And when it happened, it would be one of those that leave a mark forever. Because stories like this don't end. They stay with us. They live in the chest, and they remind us every day of the power that only a dog has, the power to transform what was pain into a miracle. Have you ever stopped to think about how time has a curious way of giving back what we lost? Sometimes he takes long turns, leaves. Scars takes the price of pride. But in the end, when the heart is ready, he brings back what never stopped being ours. This was how the days were unfolding at the hospital. The noise of the machines, the nurses coming in and out, the cold routine of a white room contrasted with the heat that discreetly began to be reborn in Mister's chest. Edward, he was weaker, The body was still struggling to recover from the trauma of the accident. But what hurt most wasn't the cut on his face or the broken rib. What really hurt was having seen on video with his own eyes the dog he abandoned, saving his life. There was no way around this truth. There was no justification. Rocky, the same dog he sent away, was the only one who stayed, the only one who didn't turn his back, the only one who didn't give up. In the first days of hospitalization, Eduardo thought about Rocky all the time. He closed his eyes and remembered the sound of paws on the kitchen floor, the way he lay with his head on, his paws close to the door, just to be close. He remembered the look, that puppy dog look that seems to see deeper than the mirror itself. I thought about it, and my chest tightened. How could he do this? How could he expel the only creature who truly loved him even in the worst moments? The answer didn't come, because there was no acceptable answer. All that was left was guilt, regret, and timid hope. The one that lives inside us when we know we've done something wrong, but we hope, with all our hearts, to have a chance to fix it. And this chance Eduardo didn't know yet was coming. Outside, Rocky was still there, day after day, sitting near the entrance with his body curled up in the shadowy corners, eyes fixed on the door. He didn't need to know what was being said about. I didn't need to understand the videos, the comments, the commotion. For him, it was enough to feel, and he felt that behind those cold walls, there was still his human, the one he wouldn't leave behind. Because what Rocky wanted most, more than a home, more than recognition, was to see him again. The nurses saw him daily. Some cried as they passed him. Others stopped to cuddle or leave some food. The NGO volunteers tried to take him to a shelter, provide him with a safer place, but there was no way. Rocky escaped. It came back, as if to say, I belong here. I'm only leaving when he leaves here with me. And time only proved that. With each new dawn, there he was, faithful as always. Until the reunion happened. It was on a shy, sunny morning when Eduardo was able to sit up a little in bed, still with his eyes sunken, but with a lighter soul. The doctor entered the room with a smile on her lips and said softly, There's someone out here who hasn't left here since the day of the accident. Do you think you're ready to see them yet? Eduardo couldn't respond with words. He just nodded. His heart was beating hard, as if he was feeling it again after a long time. He didn't know what to expect. I was afraid. Fear of not being forgiven. Scared to look into that dog's eyes and see the pain he caused. But I also had hope, and that hope was greater than anything. Minutes later, the bedroom door slowly opened. A silence took over the environment. The beats on the machine's monitor seemed louder. And then, with slow, cautious steps, Rocky entered, with your ass low, but swaying slowly, with his ears lowered and his gaze firm, full of emotion. He entered as if he didn't know, if he could, like someone who wanted to but still doubted, as if waiting for a sign, and the signal came. Eduardo stretched out his hand, his voice breaking, almost whispering, "Come, my boy, forgive me." It was enough. Rocky walked over to the bed, put his nose in his hand and let out a long, deep sigh that seemed to say, "I never left." And then Eduardo cried, but it wasn't just any crying. It was a different cry, a cry that washed away everything, the pain, the remorse, the emptiness, a cry that came from deep inside, from a place where he had stored the pain of loss, loneliness, and mistakes that he could not undo. And Rocky, as he always did, stayed there, in silence, next to him, just present, just being love. That room, once cold and clinical, was now full of life. Nurses stood at the door, some held back tears. The volunteers watched from afar, respecting that moment. It was like watching a miracle, a reunion that didn't need words, because everything that needed to be said was already there, in Rocky's eyes, in the grip of Edward's hand, in the silent forgiveness that happens when love is stronger than anything. They stayed there for hours. Rocky lay down next to the bed without moving, and Eduardo, even though tired, kept his hand on him the entire time. It was as if he was trying to make up for lost time, as if somehow that touch was healing not only the body, but the soul, yours, and Rocky's too. The hospital authorized him to stay there, in that corner, next to his owner, and for days it was like that. Rocky slept there with his head resting on the bed, watching every sigh, and Eduardo with each passing day became stronger, not just physically, but emotionally, because he had felt again, smiling, to love, and all of this, thanks to that dog who never gave up. Their reunion made news too. The images spread even further, but in that room, none of that mattered. It was just the two of them, a man and his dog, a love interrupted by pain, but reconnected by loyalty. Have you ever noticed how sometimes a simple gesture can change everything? How is a gate that opens not just an iron or wooden structure moving, but a symbol of something much bigger, a fresh start, healing, forgiveness? That's exactly what happened when Eduardo, still with slow steps and his body marked by the accident, arrived home with Rocky by his side. It wasn't just a return home, it was a return to oneself, a reunion with the part he had lost long before the accident, the ability to feel, to allow himself to love, to recognize mistakes and, above all, to redeem himself with humility. The gate of the house was there, the same way as always, the slightly rusty hinges, the characteristic creak, the lock that didn't even work properly anymore. But when Edward placed his hand on him before pushing, he took a deep breath. It was as if he knew that that gesture, although simple, carried immense weight. A cycle was being closed there, the cycle of pain, loneliness, pride. And when the gate opened, it wasn't just Rocky who entered. It was also hope, relief, the certainty that it is never too late to start over. Rocky entered first, as if he recognized every inch of that dirt floor. He sniffed the air, turned twice in the same place where he used to roll on his belly in the air, and then looked back. I expected to see the owner smiling, maybe saying something like old times, but it wasn't necessary, because Eduardo's eyes said it all. He was there in one piece, even though he was still hurt. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly present. The house, despite the time, was still the same. The balcony with the half-worn wooden bench, the kitchen with the smell of stone soap, the old cloth in the corner of the room. Only now everything seemed different, not for objects, but for energy, for Rocky's presence, because of the new way Eduardo looked at every detail, because now everything he saw carried a different value. Everything reminded him of what he almost lost, and everything took on new meaning. In the first few days, it was like relearning how to live. Edward rediscovered what it was like to have company over breakfast, the sound of hurried paws running after the slipper, the feeling of having someone waiting outside the bathroom, the warmth of a body pressed against your feet as you lie down at night. Simple things, almost invisible, but that make all the difference in the lives of those who have allowed themselves to love again. And Rocky, in turn, changed almost nothing. The same loyal, calm, affectionate dog remained, but there was a new sparkle in his eyes, something that said, "I knew you would come back." He didn't demand. It was just there, whole, as it always has been. But now he was seen, completely seen. And Eduardo, now with a clearer heart, understood every gesture, every bark, every look with depth. It was as if the two were finally on the same wavelength. Time passed, and little by little, the house became a home again. The neighborhood noticed the change. Some passed through the gate and waved, praised Rocky and petted him. Eduardo received visitors with more openness. He told the story. He got emotional. He himself was surprised by how easily he now had to talk about feelings, something that previously seemed impossible. And it wasn't because he became someone else. It was because Rocky helped him find again who he always was, but had forgotten, because of the pain. On Sundays, the scene was always the same. Eduardo sitting on the porch, hat on his head, coffee in an aluminum mug, and Rocky lying next to him, with his nose pressed against his paws and his eyes closed, in complete peace. And whoever passed by might not know what those two went through. Maybe he didn't even imagine that the love between them was rescued from the bottom of an abyss. But those who stopped to talk, to listen to the story, left transformed, because there was no way to listen to that narrative without feeling something move inside. And here comes the great truth of all this. True forgiveness doesn't need words. Eduardo never needed to ask for forgiveness with elaborate phrases. He never had to kneel or make promises. The simple fact that he looked into Rocky's eyes, that he reached out his hand, that he brought him back into the house and into his heart, said it all, and Rocky understood. as dogs always understand, with the body, with the look, with the soul. This is the kind of love that cannot be taught, that can't be bought, that can't be explained. It's the kind of love that heals invisible wounds, that enters in silence but changes everything around. It's the kind of love that only a puppy can offer, and when we see something like this happen, there's no way we can escape unscathed. Because Eduardo and Rocky's story may be unique in its details, but it carries something universal, the chance to start over, the reminder that there is still time, that no mistake is too big when repentance is sincere, and that love, when it is true, survives even abandonment. Rocky not only saved Mr. Eduardo on the day of the accident, he saved it much earlier, when you decided to wait, when you decided to forgive, when you decided to love even without receiving anything in return. And so, the real change didn't just happen in the house, it happened in the heart, in the rhythm of the days, in the shine of the eyes, and in everything there was more color, more meaning, more life. This story, despite being simple, leaves a profound message, a message that touches anyone who has or has had a dog. Who knows that look that seems to read the soul? Who has ever been saved, without even knowing it, by a paw extended in silence? Because that's how a dog's love is. He doesn't charge, don't point. It doesn't require it. But when you decide to give back, it heals even the most hidden wounds, and it teaches us that sometimes all we need is to open the gate and the heart. And when that happens, life changes forever. Stories like this touch us in a different way, right? When we follow something as profound as Rocky and Mr. Eduardo, it seems that something inside us is also reconnecting. Maybe because deep down, we all carry some longing, some guilt, some love that still needs healing. And if this story made you feel that way, it's because it fulfilled its role. She brought you closer to something true, and that's priceless. Now, what you just experienced here can go far beyond your screen. Every time someone likes this video or comments, it reaches other people who also need to feel what you felt. So if it touched your heart in any way, leave a "Time Rocky" here in the comments. This simple word has enormous power to create connections between those who feel like you. And the like? It's just a quick gesture that keeps this chain of good spinning. Oh, and just a warning, what comes in the next video will mess with you even more. There's an exciting twist waiting, the kind that makes us stop and take a deep breath. So make sure you subscribe here to the channel so you don't miss out. Heart ready? Because the next story will prove to you that sometimes the impossible happens. And when it happens, it changes everything.